Welcome to Outer Space, International Arts and Class Travel Podcast.
In this week's show, what is truth in the modern media? An interview with Tyler Mcnally. Commentary with Paul Paranoid from the space station. In the engine room with Jonas Langer, we have Pick Up Your Feet with a song called Macedonia Horo. Hello, I'm Rob McDonald, and I am the host and presenter of Outer Space Podcast. On today's show, we have Tyler Mcnally. Hi, Tyler. Are you there?
Hey, Rob. I'm here.
Yeah, great, man. So, Tyler, as I know you, you're the founder and one of the editors of the Last Round media agency based in Northern Ireland, which is a left-wing media, podcast, news, kind of cultural show. That's who I think you are. Is that who you are? Is there more to you, or do you want to explain what that is?
Well, the Last Round was started in 2015 as we were working towards launching a media collective that was able to speak to a large audience that was interested in anti-sectarian and also anti-capitalist politics, but wasn't getting an outlet for it in the mainstream media, and also because of that general ongoing reticence to engage with party media, the media that would be attached to left-wing parties. There was just this vacuum that was there. We were kind of rushed by Jeremy Corbyn's election as Labour leader at the time, so we ended up pushing our lunch very quickly. But we're basically a blog, and we would publish opinion editorials, essays from activists and artists about campaigns that are in the area or general issues that are of concern to them. We do also sort of have a podcast that's not frequent, but it would be semi-frequent, where we try to take issues to a bit more detail. So we've been doing that for 5 years. There's 3 of us on the editorial board, and we've only really recently restarted after a bit of a hiatus because of COVID, but also just other things that have been going on in terms of just general life as well.
Yes, General Life has a habit of stopping alternative media, which obviously we have a financial problem with keeping shows going and these kind of things. One of the reasons I wanted to get you on the show, though, is because you have this years of experience behind you in doing an alternative media agency. You have done podcasting, you do the blogging. You are, if you like, more up to date than me, at least, in terms of how to get the news out there. And it's of my opinion that how to tell the news, journalism, has changed, but it's also an art form in itself. And therefore, to get you on the show, I would like to sort of pick your brains a little bit about some of those issues. What is the art of reporting? And also right now, because of COVID-19, everything's changed. This podcast is a reflection of that. My art is I make monuments and sculptures. My projects are dead for the time being, so I've turned to this art form, and therefore we live in a technological society more and more increasingly. But in the last 6 months, this has really speeded up, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think in terms of storytelling and journalism as an art form, where I start is always with Lenin's understanding that journalism is history understood in the contemporary, so as it happens. And that's obviously very important for mainstream media and the people who fund it, in that it always supports the status quo, almost sort of how sculptures and statues, works of art, generally reflect the victors of society throughout time. Media is very much that, just in the contemporary without the history attached to it. Oh God, what was the second half of your question?
Yeah, well, I have this habit, because I'm still learning this art form, of asking a very long question, which is actually as much an opinion piece as it is actually a question. No, I was sort of asking about how COVID has changed everything. You know, we're in this technological society now. We have been for a while. You know, but now everybody's on Zoom. Every day, I have 2 meetings on Zoom at least. You know, I've now got my own podcast, and so reporting in the traditional sense, you know, if you think of I don't know, some black and white TV movies, some guy with a notebook, you know, and he's asking interesting questions, and he's like a bit of an investigator into the situation. And these days that's changed, you know, and I quite like the point you're making about the modern media supports the status quo. But if that's true, what's the state of the modern media in the present situation, would you say?
Well, in terms of COVID and like how it's changed things, I think it's more that it's exposed a lot of ongoing processes in society. Like if you look at how media has changed between 2008 and now, a lot of processes have been going on, which has basically left journalism in the state where it is now, which is that the idea of the reporter with the notepad who goes into these areas and like taps into the unbroken thread of history to establish a story in terms of like a fable or how things have happened. That's largely dead, but it's been dead for a long time. Like when you think of media, you think of correspondents, for example, like people who would have like a niche special interest, like a knowledge base. Like for a long time, media organizations would have correspondents on like health, science, education, like what you would say is like the key areas of society in that time. And like the underpinning idea of that is your correspondent is able to scrutinize whatever comes in, whether it's like a government press release or like a story that's ongoing, and they're able to explain it to the audience based on their analysis, which is sort of independent or like at arm's reach. In the last 10 years, there's been a switch in how like the economy of these organizations work, where they've been getting rid of correspondents in the main. Like a lot of newspapers don't have a lot of specialist correspondents outside of like business. Some places even have like property correspondents. Like it very much reflects the economy. But that gap has been filled by a reliance on wire agencies like Associated Free Press, Reuters, like filling the gaps where traditionally you would have had someone going out, like a foreign correspondent, going out and covering stories on the ground and like getting that narrative, that experience, that perspective. That's now done by wire transmit, like those short wire stories that sort of end up as filler on newspapers.
Is it? I mean, just correct me if I'm wrong, but is this like wire agency thing? Is this kind of a privatization and neoliberalism of the media source? Would that be a right way of looking at it? That in the past you would have had the big media companies. Yeah, they'd be biased. Yeah, they'd be arguing for the status quo of the system. Blah blah blah. But you're explaining there something quite interesting. I think that they would have had departments and specialists. You know, and you know maybe I would have been hired as an art critic or something, but you're saying now that they sort of outsource this to these wire agencies. Is that what you mean? Would that be correct? I'm just trying to get my head around what's actually going on.
Well, like to give an example, instead of, let's say, 5 newspapers having their own foreign correspondents, now they all more than likely get their international news through the same wire agency. So that's the same agency producing one single narrative that then gets sold to 5 different publications, which could have 5 different audiences. But at the same time, it's massively streamlined how news is produced. Like it's very hard nowadays to get like news that is analysis and not just like who, what, where, when, and why.
That's very interesting because, just out of experience, when I have had a press, when I've been involved in a campaign or a process, once you get it in the stream, everybody's reporting each other's reporting. That's definitely something that happens. It's like a copycat kind of news formula. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there is that, and like from the aspect of campaigning, like I know from my own personal experience, when you're drafting press releases, the idea is to make it as well written as possible, so that journalists who are typically very overworked these days, or on like precarious freelance contracts, they're able to sort of just copy and paste your release and not really edit it that much, and that's sort of how you smuggle almost like an aspect of whatever you're pushing for.
So this is a way of working within the system. If you do your press release in a certain way, if you pose yourself, you might just get a snippet in the bottom of a main newspaper and make the headlines. Is that what you mean?
That's definitely the approach that trade unions and like NGOs would have nowadays. Instead of actually building your own like propaganda vehicles in society, you try to collaborate with the ones that already exist, which has its own issues, its own shortcomings, but like you can get some information through. But like as society continues to get polarized through the COVID crisis and the economic crisis, we're going to see more and more of the media becoming not so much a neutral arbiter, but almost like Bonapartist. So it's just going to be self-interested. You're going to see more breaks with like established like media norms. Like for example, yesterday's column in the Sunday Times, which was basically glorifying commuting, even though commuting in every scientific study is an absolute nightmare for people's health and social well-being. This almost like commuting is like this patriotic endeavor, and like you start to see more of that nonsense start to drip right through, and because it's in the established press, it's given an air of legitimacy.
I mean, that's really interesting because, I mean, you started off by saying, there was in a sense, there's a bias from the press, the main press, that they're going to support the, I think on this podcast, we can accept that we know that there is this massive bias in the news, and it was always going to support the status quo of the system. But as the COVID crisis, and particularly as you've said, the economic crisis, as that unravels, they're going to get more extreme, is what you're kind of saying. Which brings me to the point that aren't we able to create our own media? We're doing it now, aren't we? And certainly you're right that NGOs and trade unions follow the stream. But some of them, well, not trade unions so much, I haven't seen that, but I've seen some NGOs have their own sort of podcasty shows. Do you think there's going to be a growth in that in the next period, specifically from the left in general, not necessarily the hard left, but the softer left, the traditional organisations? Do you think there's going to be an expansion into doing our own media with our own messages?
I would like to hope that there would be like an explosion of like almost media from below, and like you do see elements of that, like people starting their own blogs or even like their own podcast. People do TikToks now, which I'm too old to understand what that is, but I understand it's video vlogging of some sort. Like there's loads of ways to do it, like alongside the like almost like that outsourcing and like whittling down of mainstream media outlets so that they are like financially very lean. You also have just this massive explosion in being able to access media technology like microphones, recording equipment, cameras. Like it's all more affordable and accessible than it has probably been in any other period in human history. And it really is a question of like how you take that stuff up, and it does come back to what is truth and like how we approach it, because like there's two ways you can go about storytelling and like news from the left. You can either have not like dogmatism, but like a very like strict approach where it's you're talking about recruitment, and like obviously when you're writing, you're wanting to recruit people to your cause. And the way that some people do that is that they'll write about something for about 500 words, and then they'll put in a 200-word blurb at the bottom saying this is why you should join our campaign or whatever. I'm more in favor of, and this always gets people's backs up, but I'm in favor of ideology being in the background. I think that if you're writing something about a particular issue or a campaign, or maybe just like ideology, like what you're writing throughout the article should make the argument about joining the cause, and then you can have like 2 sentences at the end to say this is how you can get involved. But if you have like a whole paragraph dedicated to that, then people do become standoffish. They feel like they're having something like not so much forced on them, but it's almost like the reader is not really allowed to interpret what is being presented.
I think this is a really important point, actually, Tyler. I mean, obviously, there's a whole propaganda that ideology is dead. Well, that's nonsense. We won't even bother talking about that on this show. It's obviously not. But there is this idea of how do you explain a different ideology? I mean, even political movements have developed in the recent period. Things like Podemos in Spain, other where they said, they don't say it now because it's nonsense, that we're neither left nor right. And it's like, and so they tried this. It's not hiding ideology. That's not what you're saying. I understand the point you're saying. You're saying explain ideology rather than start off with the complete works of Marx. Boom, there you go. That's how you understand it. But what I think is interesting about what you're saying about this is you're tailoring it on the question of what is truth. Do you want to? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. For example, like we all understand that the established media outlets, they perform their role of upholding the status quo. They have a very particular understanding of what truth is. And also in between different outlets, that understanding is different. It's nuanced. I think we don't do ourselves any favors when we treat media as like a monolithic, like shibboleth, like this just obelisk of sameness. For example, Financial Times plays an incredibly clear role of informing people who create profit for very powerful sections of the ruling class. And like that is their role in how they support the status quo. Like they have to be clear, they have to be concise, their perspectives have to be very good. Whereas the Sun, the role that it plays, because of its audience, its advertising base, and also like the editorial influence through the board, is actually to obfuscate and like make class divisions and how class society is dominated. Like it's just to make that unclear. It's to divide. It's to deflect onto other groups that are oppressed in society. So even like within the capitalist press, what truth is very different in between all of them. At least what the overt truth is, because behind the scenes, the one truth is clear, and that is the support for the free market. For ourselves, truth is fundamentally different. It has to expose divisions that are in society. And to be honest, it does mean taking a very different approach to news and reporting. So like, for example, with COVID, like the way that stories tend to be like reported is very blinkered. So for example, like in England, there's this huge push to return people back to the office. So where a Marxist or like a socialist would look at the entire process and go, well, if someone's going to work, there needs to be safe public transport, there needs to be proper sick pay, there needs to be proper things in place. What mainstream commentators are doing is just talking about the office or just talking about the commute as if they are separate phenomena and that they're not actually intrinsically linked in terms of like how society operates. It's a deliberate obfuscation that's delivered through framing. So even the person who's writing the story doesn't necessarily understand what they are doing ideologically, but that's why they're paid to do it. It's because they do not understand it.
It's like the poverty of media, basically, that we're talking about, as a general sense. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, what pops into my head as you were talking about those things was, how the capitalist media has many wings, which has many different purposes aimed at different people. And obviously for ourselves, we have to think, of the left. How do we do that? And maybe copying them is not the answer. It's like not. I wrote an article recently on statues, and I was saying it was great that we pulled down these statues of oppression about the Black Lives Matter and etc. But I also criticised the raising of a statue of Lenin in Germany. Initially I was like, yeah, wicked, and then I thought, no, we don't want that Victorian method of statues, of echoing the great leader. Now, obviously, it's a more complicated subject than that, but it does strike me that the role of the artist in media now, and how, like there's memes and there's different forms of creative expression of ideas. And of course, we're biased as well, but I think, we're more honest about our bias. We don't present it as real truth. And it comes back to this question of truth. I'm interested, what do you think the left should be doing? I mean, is there anything, I was saying before, wouldn't it be great if there was an explosion of sort of media from below? And there is, to a certain degree, isn't there? I mean, there is new media agencies. Is there something you think we should be doing? Is there a route we could be carving out for ourselves? Do you have any ideas for that?
I think your initial point about like mimicking what's already done is really important, because like in 2016, whenever Trump was first elected, Jacobin published a piece which was called Breitbart for the Left.
Just to explain to the viewers, in America and other places, Jacobin is a left-wing news blog thing in America.
Yeah, it's a journal and it's got an online presence. The article talks about an old German communist called Willy Munzenberg, who started the Munzenberg Trust in Weimar, Germany. What Munzenberg was doing was creating various media forums like cinema, magazines, journals that were aimed explicitly at the working class as an audience, but they were nuanced in how they delivered ideology through storytelling, through art, through craft. He eventually became the largest media organization outside of the old liberal media outlets. This is at a time when the SPD, like the Social Democratic Party in Germany, was the largest working class organization in the world. It had over 100 newspapers that were dedicated to different political subject areas as a form of political education. This was a very long way to approach a short point, but I think before we engage with what is truth in terms of like the nuts and bolts of what we do, I think we need to understand the role that our media has to play, because like if you mimic bourgeois media, like their media is set up with the ruling class already understanding that they're a class of themselves for themselves, whereas we don't really have that because of their propaganda. So if you just mimic it, you don't really create the conditions where you can raise class consciousness, where you can raise trade union consciousness, things like that. So I think there's aspects of history that we can learn from, where we can develop media outlets, artistic forms of storytelling, of narrative that can help really uplift existing workers' struggles on the ground, which is really important. Like that's something that goes right back to Pravda's focus on what were called workers' correspondents, which were workers in factories who told stories about what was going on in their workplace, which was then put into Pravda, and that was used by the Bolsheviks then to recruit, but also to agitate, to organize, etc. So like the media form wasn't just like reporting. It was also organizing and agitating as well, and educating. So like the role is multifaceted. It's got many faces.
It's good. I mean, I think this is a class struggle podcast. The idea is that we're quite obviously on the side that there's a class struggle going on, and therefore our media does, and our art and our creativity has to reflect this. It can't be silent. We're in a world of serious crisis, and if we were to be silent about it, we'd be kind of ignoring the obvious truth of the situation. I mean, one final thing, which is probably a huge question, which I do have a tendency to do, but it means that we can maybe talk about it a bit more later on. Trump himself represents something with the question of media. I think I think it's almost like he's all the things you were saying earlier. He's like the outcome of that, and it's like we've got a leader of the world at the moment. I mean, the elections will be very shortly, who's an obvious liar, an obvious mistruth, and just ignores the media and actually attacks the media, the mainstream capitalist media. What do you think this represents?
I think it represents two things. The first being the total failure of media to perform its role from like a liberal perspective, where like media is meant to inoculate society from like tyranny, as they would describe it. And that has been completely done by capitalism's own processes of like the technological changes that we talked about, the access, and how that's really broadened out who is able to become like a broadcaster, who's able to spread propaganda. And it's meant that the far right, for a long time, has been able to build an entire like apparatus or like a media ecology, like an ecosystem that's just outside the established media. So that means that people like Trump are able to rubbish the established media. They're able to just blatantly lie or talk out the wrong hole, whichever way you want to put it, because they have their base, and their base is almost inoculated from established media. So it's like a mirror inversion of how liberals understand like outlets like the New York Times, CNN, etc. So it does show that Trump and like that political milieu that he represents, the processes that he represents, and the groups that are behind him, like they understand that you cannot control what you do not own. And they have built their own stuff. They've built their own structures, their own systems, and they're able to get their word out to their audience. And like there's a lot there to be learned from.
Yeah, I mean, and also I guess there's always been conspiracy theories, but the conspiracy theories these days is a huge. It's an industry, isn't it? It's like left and right. What do you think about the conspiracy theory question? Is there something there to be learned as well? Because Trump, I think, represents that, but there's also a left or anti-establishment, not far right conspiracy theory sort of engine out there too, isn't there? Which I think. What do you think is going on with that?
Well, we live in a time where trade union density is lower than it's probably ever been, generally speaking, across Western countries. We have more access to information than we've ever had before, but like education services, access to university, all of that has been gatekept and like blocked off from a vast majority of working class people who by no means are dumb. Like we're all able to engage in various layers and various means of critical thinking. But I think the explosion in conspiracy theories that we've really seen since like 2016, 2017, I think most of it in terms of like from like a working class perspective is that lack of a methodology to explain what's happening in society, and people just latch on to something as a means of understanding what's going on around them. In terms of the right, they've used conspiracy in order to obfuscate their own failures. Like I think this whole like cancel culture rubbish, like that is probably the biggest conspiracy that's going around at the moment, because really it's consequences for your actions. But like that sort of represents that like almost fall from grace that capitalism has in the popular imagination, in the popular consciousness. Like it's probably never been an easier time to be a socialist, at least culturally, to be against capitalism, to be against greedy CEOs. Like how many TV shows are dedicated to big companies being the bad guy, yet at the same time they own everything. So they allow little snippets of criticism. And like I think it does represent almost like a crisis of legitimacy. And on top of that, like the main conspiracy around Trump would be the QAnon stuff, where people like Tom Hanks and Hillary Clinton apparently eat babies and like drink their blood and stuff, and it's all done out of a pizza shop somewhere. Like that stuff
it's laughable, but it actually has power, and it's important. Well, listen, Tyler, that's been a great explanation, I think, of some of the things that are going on within news and within reporting and within media in general. I think we're going to cut it there. And we'll come back to some of these points with you, because I think we've only just opened up a nest, of things that are taking place. And hopefully, with your news agency, with this podcast, and with others, I think the call has to be that we have to link up, don't we? And have to share each other's stuff. We have to, have more common work, because the one thing that what we stand for is working together. So I hope to get you back on the show. In the in the description below, I'll put all the last round's links and whatever, and people should definitely have a look at what you're up to in Northern Ireland. So on that, mate, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon, okay?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No worries, man. Bye now.
Cheers, bye.
Hey, Paul, are you up there?
Up here in space. How you doing, man?
Welcome everybody to the space station with Paul. We're floating around up in the sky, and we're going to discuss that interview with Tyler Mcnally. So, Paul, give us something. What's your first thoughts?
Well, this is a subject very close to my heart. I'm really fascinated by the role of independent media and the free press and what's happened to the mainstream media in the last few years. And we don't know if we should share this with the audience or not, but we've just done a pre-interview chat, which is the longest one we've ever done to work out how to sketch this out.
It was an hour, ladies and gentlemen, of high level discussion on this question. So yeah, go on, Paul. Carry on explaining a little bit.
Well,
you've told everybody now.
Tyler, really liked him. We were talking earlier, and we were saying that, like, you know, he's a really solid guy, and I just felt he was touching on so many bases that interest me. And this growing, is paranoia the wrong word to use? I mean, this growing concern that that there is something a little untoward about
something peculiar going on planet Earth, and it's coming through the media.
And it's gonna okay, look.
I think maybe the way into this is near the end of the interview. I mentioned Trump. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when this goes out, we do record this a little bit ahead of time. Okay. Although we do it in a live fashion. Apart from we do discuss it a little bit beforehand. So the Trump elections are kind of now. Yeah. And we don't know when we're recording this whether he wins or not. But what we do know is his last years in office, and what we do know is when we talk about this question of media and independent media and this question of what is truth, okay, and I think we both agree that Trump is the biggest fucking arsehole that's ever led a country. You know, he's got far right tendencies. There's a lot of problems going on there. We won't go into necessarily all that, but on the question of media and how he handles it has shown up an awful lot of stuff. And so I think there's something in that. When we there's some poison in the water, isn't there, with the question of the media and what is truth and what is information and how do people understand what is news and what isn't news. It's a massive subject now with the proliferation of the internet and all these kind of things. So that's a subject for us, April, and it goes down into many ways. So what are you thinking?
My first reaction is when I look at the state of the modern mainstream media, which disturbs me greatly, I think about where we are now, and I've only got to do one thing. All I've got to do is think about that movie, which I've not actually seen, but I know of it, so I feel a bit stupid bringing it up. But I must watch it properly. But what's the movie? Is it All the President's Men?
You can't remember the name. You've never watched it, but it's an important point to make.
But
Go on.
I can't.
This sounds like false news to me.
Well, now it's coming to my head, though. I really need to use. What's the movie about the Watergate scandal? What's it called?
I don't know, Paul.
Oh, really? I think.
I might know. I mean, you're asking a person that always loses quizzes. You know, I mean, I've got an analytical mind, but I don't remember shit all.
But you remember the incident of the Watergate scandal, and it was such a big deal that they made this really big movie about it, and which embarrassingly has gone out of my mind.
We'll put it in the notes. We'll put it in the notes because we'll work it out.
And it was a big and that so you could the idea of journalistic intervention in drawing the truth out of a situation was so deeply and so vividly part of our culture
Sorry, Paul, what you're talking about in terms of the movie, when we had our pre-chat, wasn't an actual movie I was talking about. What I was talking about is this image of a 1950s movie with a guy with a notebook from the local town, worked for the local Gazette in America, and he would find out the big conspiracy, and he would be a real. That's what I think you were referring to.
And there's a particular movie that exemplifies that more than anything else. And the Watergate scandal and the whole idea. What I'm trying to say is that we used to we acknowledged the role of the press, of journalistic freedom and journalistic sort of perseverance in the act of pursuing the truth. And the growing feeling at the moment is that journalism is becoming a tool of the state.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think there was a couple of things that Tyler said. He talked about the lack of the independent correspondent, the specialist. He talked about this idea of the wire agency, which would give news in a broad way that everybody would pick up. And he's talked about establishment news collapsing as kind of establishment collapses, because we're in a crisis now in the world, and in a sense that capitalist institutions, in many places are seen as corrupt and letting people down, and the media, the official media, that's kind of happened as well at the same time as we've had this massive sort of growth of independent media, which is exactly what we're doing right now. This is in independent media. This never happened before when we were kids. There was some radio, that's true. I mean, a Radio Caroline and these kind of sort of pirate radio stations, but it wasn't like it is today. So the whole question of information technology society and what is truth, really this question of biased and who tells the truth is much more prevalent. And so in the interview with Tyler, we did talk about, what the left-wing press should be doing and how it should be developed. He talked about the state of the official media, and this is where this thing comes in, and it boils down to what is the truth. How do you know what is real and what is not real?
Now, I don't know if the information explosion and the technology explosion, like the internet, has. You see, what it's done is, I don't know how I feel about this, but basically what we're looking at, Rob, is there's a kind of a democracy of information now. Like, as we know, I have a YouTube channel. We're doing this podcast. I'm not really qualified at all to talk about the things I talk about on my YouTube channel, which is mainly about narcissism, right? But my experience as somebody, and I have done somebody that's has experienced a lot of narcissism and the effects of it, and the research I've done, bearing in mind that what's what I'm looking for? That I vet myself while I'm doing it, but it's very easy to basically become a self-appointed expert on YouTube, and there's a lot of it about. It's completely unregulated. But what is it? Is that good or is that bad?
I just wrote down a little note when you were saying that, because there is a democracy of information, but there's not a democracy of distribution. So the small amount of people we have listening to us, if I had £1 million, or if I had a connection in main media, then we could have millions very quickly. Now, one of the interesting things about the democracy of media, of information that has happened, is some shows do catch the winds. They go the magic word, isn't it? Viral. It's a virus. We know all about viruses at the moment, and how they spread amongst the population. And it's a very interesting thing as well, how information moves within humanity, and this is kind of what we're talking about here. But for me, there's not a democracy of distribution. There's still a control of distribution by main media, but they've lost trust. Nobody trusts them in the way that they probably would have had more trust in the past. No, would you agree with that, or do you think that's?
Well, I think I'm a little bit sure. I'm not sure we're on the same page there, because the democracy I'm talking about is that never has information been more available to as many people in human history.
Yeah, but I do think there's a point there, Paul, because there's often said, oh, everything can be said and put out there in the media. And yeah, for example, we can reach 100 people or whatever we reach. Yeah. But there's not, I countered the point of this super internet that lets you say what you want to say by whoever wants to say it kind of thing. I countered that with the control of distribution. And this is a bit like, it's a bit like in music, you know, everybody can do set up a website and do a Bandcamp thing with their bands. We never got that when we were playing when we were younger. Christ, we would have loved it, wouldn't we? You know,
we would have
gone fucking mad for YouTube and all that stuff.
Much more success. We were like literally working with photocopiers.
Well, would we though? This is the question. Would we have had more success?
I've seen people do it. I've seen people, the generation that came up after us that had access to that internet. I've seen them like just get put up a gig and the place just filled up. It could be argued they're better than us. I don't think that's the
yeah, it could be. Anyway, let's get back to this point of what is truth, Paul. Let's get back to the point. What is truth? You know, get onto your banana, would you, young man?
The safety word. No. What we're talking? So, are you saying that? Okay, YouTube, say for example, we're talking about. It must be millions of channels. It must be, you know. And you're saying that, like, yeah, but it's still being filtered in terms of popularity. I mean, like,
it's a bit like having 400 channels on your TV and they're all shit, apart from 2. You know, and
but what makes it? Yeah, but let's say the 380th one is cheap, but it's got really good information. Are you saying that the two?
Yeah, but that's where I agree with the democracy of information. But what I'm talking about is the democracy of distribution is a different question.
By distribution, do you mean the two at the top of your channel for a reason? That's because they've got money behind them. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, more or less. And but what I was countering my own point with was this question of things that go viral. So like big alternative media shows that do happen, you know. So this is the interesting thing. I mean, we want this to go like that, don't we? We want this to catch the wind. We're not going to throw hundreds of quid at it because we haven't got fucking 2 quid between us, you know. So we're going to have to hope that people like listening to us going. I mean, what other shows are out there that, you know, have that kind of following? I mean, they're there, aren't they?
There are very successful podcasts, yeah. I mean, usually they a very successful podcast. The thing that makes it successful, though, is has some kind of novelty value, and that pushes it up. And then people do spend a lot of money, like you say, like making. There are ways to sort of spread this thing around. Is this what we're talking about? I think what we're talking about, and I'm aware of time as well. I think what we're talking about is the bottlenecking, right, of what reaches people. We're saying that even though there is this, like, potentially, I'm starting to qualify it, potential democracy of information and entertainment and access to, important, opinion, right, to informed opinion, right. What does it matter if the stuff, you know, the really popular stuff, which has got money behind it and is controlled, and also let's not forget this is appalling crisis at the moment in YouTube, where they've started behaving extremely censoriously towards their content providers.
Well, this is a general problem, isn't it, with the whole media? Yeah. You know, there's a whole growth of authoritarianism legislations coming through, and what you're allowed to do. I mean, even like the internet is not the free world web or whatever it was meant to be. You know, it's very controlled. Facebook now is full of adverts. You know, I mean, capitalism is insidious. It takes the creative, as we talk about in this show a lot, it commodifies it and it fucks it up. You know, and we talk about music. And, you know, yes, some stuff can get through this democracy of information that we maybe wouldn't have seen before. But before, we might have had John Peel, you know, with music that would allow some of this filter, some of this sort of alternative to come through. Now, maybe not as good. But I think there is an issue there that still mainstream music, popular music, is still shit, compared to the value that's lying underneath that doesn't come through. So we talk about media, we talk about music, all these things. It's how capitalism allows things to pass. And on this question, it's the most important thing is information. Like what is true, what is news, So do you have any before we finish, Paul? Do you have any bananas to talk about? Maybe we should explain that to the audience.
Yeah. We had this idea because we had a very passionate pre-interview chat to prepare for this, which took us, like you say, an hour to just like map out how we're going to do this. And in the end, we decided we'd have a safety word in case I went off on a conspiracy theory rant, and that safety word is banana. So that's what that reference is about. I think what I would finish on. Look, I tell you what, it's a bit of a word of warning. One of the people that I really like, that I follow, I'm very passionate about, is the Richie Allen Show, who gets a lot of stick. But basically, what he does is he's a trained journalist, worked in the media for many, many years, and he struck out on his own 6 years ago, and he's the most successful independent internet journalist in Europe. And he does a fantastic job. He has some very, very controversial people on his program. He doesn't agree with everybody he has on the program, and he's very good on challenging them. He has been accused of being anti-Semitic and racist and all that stuff, but it's nonsense. I've followed the show for years, and he's very, very sharp on anything like that. At the very least, he will say to them, I understand that that's what you think or that's what you feel, but I don't agree with you, when it's patently obvious the person is a lunatic racist. But the point I'm trying to say is this: he has made it aware that he is conscious, it's been made clear to him that they are going to introduce a license situation where regular independent journalists who produce a regular show at a regular time live are going to have to be licensed. And although on the surface that might sound fair enough, he's pointing out that once that license is in place and he's licensed, then the conditions of that license can be altered. And he foresees the beginning of the end of the sort of role he provides, the service and the platform he provides, in my experience, almost always to qualified experts in their field who've written books and are often educated in the thing they're talking about. Things like Piers Corbyn, Jeremy Corbyn's brother, he's a very, very qualified expert on the climate change situation and has got a lot to say on that. That's the sort of person Richie Allen has on the show. And what I want to say is, like, if that's true, if they are starting to tighten the leash on well-produced and well-researched and thorough journalistic activity in the independent sphere, I think a certain amount of paranoia is justified, says Paul Paranoid.
Well, I don't know the Richie Allen Show. I've only heard it once, actually, as it happens, and that was when you were on it. And actually, that had an effect on me realizing that I had this long old friend that I should do this show with, so that had a connection. The question is, I don't listen to everything that Richie Allen does, so I don't know. But what I do know is that we are entering a political period where draconian laws are coming more and more, and this is the situation that to find out what the truth is. Now, we made this reference to the banana, and I think we should finish it with it, Paul, because we had a long discussion and we decided to more or less respect the interview rather than go down a deep discussion about conspiracy theories and a deep discussion about what we both think to that. And as an experiment, people who want to know that discussion, if you ask for it, we'll send you the recording. How about that, Paul?
Awesome. I love that.
So if you listen to this and you think, I wonder what they said about conspiracy theories then. Well, we've got it recorded and you can have it, but you have to ask for it. So we'll leave it just at that, and that'll be a test to see if people actually give a shit what we're saying about it. But if you want another hour that touches on the points that this little commentary didn't touch on, then get hold of us. And so we'll finish it at that one, shall we, Paul? And I think we're going to have Tyler back, because he
just going to say,
didn't give him long enough. I felt I finished him after about 35 minutes. I think I just thought he's got so much more to go into, and I think we can refer to him on these kind of questions. So if something comes up, we maybe get him to send us a little snippet. So if you're listening, Tyler, send us some stuff, link in with us. You know, we're going to share. I like his blog and all that sort of stuff. So I think we'll get him back. And I think
he should be. I think let's have him on every series at least, and maybe twice this one.
Well, Tyler, we'll send you our conspiracy theory conversation, and maybe he can come back. He can come back to that, but we won't put the real one out. We won't put it out there. People can only hear what he says about it, and this is part of the question, though, isn't it? Because if you don't have all the context to information, how the fuck can you decide? You know, and this is when we talk about the democracy of information. Which we really should be talking about the periphery of information. You know, there's loads of stuff out there, but how do you decide what is true? Okay, I can hear Jonas knocking on the door. He says he's gone 20 minutes, guys, and you should only be 15. So we'll say goodbye there. Okay, Paul, I'll see you next week, yeah?
Awesome, mate. Cheers.
Okay, take care now.
Thank you, Tyler, for being our guest this week. We are now playing Pick Your Feet Up with their song Macedonia Horo. Enjoy.
We hope you enjoyed the show. If you have something to say to us, then join our Facebook group or contact us at outaspace.com. That's outa-space.com. See you soon!